I call Todd McClay.
Thank you. It gives me pleasure to rise and speak on the Social Security Amendment Bill number 3. Can I start by thanking the Minister, the extremely hard-working Minister Paula Bennett, for bringing this bill to the House. I particularly enjoyed her speech and introducing it, and very much look forward to it coming to our Social Services Committee, where we can seek the wider views of the public on this issue. Can I just touch on a couple of points? I've had a chance to read the bill. I understand it. I think it is doing a number of things that are important, and I'm glad to hear that others in this House are going to support it. Mr. William Sewer, who spoke earlier, spoke of many things, and at one stage he was waving a piece of paper and said, when this goes out for consultation, others will be concerned, they'll throw it in the bin. The problem with that, Mr. Speaker, was it wasn't the bill he was holding, it was his speech, so I agree with him. I'm sure many others out there would throw that speech in the rubbish bin, although we have some important work to do. The point I really want to make, Mr. Speaker, is that this is about anomalies and closing loopholes, and that's why I'm sure the Labour Party will support this all the way through. Not so long ago, we heard the Leader of the Opposition stand up in public and say that he would give a $5,000 tax break to all New Zealanders. The first $5,000 would be tax-free, and he would pay for this by closing loopholes. So I guess this was one of the loopholes he was talking about. It would not go anywhere near as close to paying for that promise that he won't be able to deliver on, but it's important as a government and as a parliament we come together to make sure that those outside of this place are treated fairly, and I believe this bill does that. As I said, I look forward to dealing with it when it comes to our committee and seeking the views of the public that Mr. Sewer said would have thrown his speech in the bin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Rajiv Bindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to take a call on this bill. And I want to say to the previous speaker this, yes, we will support this bill, probably throughout all of its stages. But let me also say to the member, we will remind that member and remind his government of all of their follies in many other areas that also relate to many of the issues raised in this bill and the principle that the speakers from the other side of the House have already talked about. So yes, we will take, Mr. Todd, every opportunity to do those as well. The first point, Mr. Speaker, is that this is correcting legislation. It's designed to fix two problems that have arisen. And yes, we can understand that. And the first arises, Mr. Speaker, from a decision of the Social Security Appeal Authority. So it's an appeal authority that's found a hole somewhere, and they want to get it fixed through a decision that relating to Section 71A of the Social Security Act, 1964, that it does not cover weekly compensation payments made by employers accredited under the Accident Compensation Corporation Accredited Employer Scheme. So the practice of reducing dollar for dollar income-tested benefits by the amount of compensation for injuries at work paid through ACC by accredited employers was illegal, and therefore it's got to be fixed. So I can see the need for correcting legislation, which is what this is. It's also interesting to note that the scheme does cover a lot of employees, about a quarter of all employees are caught by this particular scheme. So it's quite important. And there is a financial incentive for employers to be part of the scheme because they pay lower levies if they are in this particular scheme. If only some benefits came under the scheme, some income benefits came under the scheme and not others, we're told that this creates extra costs for employers and inequality amongst different types of beneficiaries. And the inequality comes up quite often in this particular speech, this particular bill, and the Minister mentioned inequality in her own deliberations as well. I just wish that the government was as quick and as fast and to also address many other kinds of inequalities that we have seen. Because some of what the government has introduced under equality measures, so to speak, are really inequality measures, and that has found many New Zealanders going backwards. Much of the tax switch for many of our citizens has the same effect as well. Now, I can see how the regulatory impact statement says that it could be seen as a disincentive to return to full-time work or part-time work if the compensation was treated as income and the full benefit was paid out. So somebody got the full benefit as well as some income. Then if that was cut off, then really it would be a disincentive for people to go back to work. The benefit plus the income would be higher and one would ordinarily receive than what one would ordinarily receive, and thus act as a disincentive. This again is a recurring theme. The assumption always is that those who are poor, those who are of low wages, somehow are out there to get the system. And so we must screw everything down to the lowest common denominator so that to make it as difficult as possible. And this bill, in a sense, does that. It tries to take everything down to the lowest common denominator. The point is, though, this is quite, it's not done in a consistent manner. There are many other areas where disincentives are a recurrent theme, but they're not addressed. However, I'm prepared to accept that there are good reasons for correcting the problem that had arisen with Section 71 of the Social Security Act 1964. The approach taken is to make it legal for these deductions to be made for those on weekly compensation payments. Now, so the government has rushed quite urgently, important to discuss this now, but again, when we look at what is the total amount of money that this provision saves, again, the regulatory impact statement does say that the problem, if not corrected, there would be an additional $700,000 in benefit expenditure per annum. So here we are, $700,000 that this particular bill is trying to that this particular bill is trying to get. So, this bill is trying to fix. Now, I agree with Katrina Shanks that if there's a problem with legislation, we should fix it up. But for something with such a small dollar value, annual dollar value, one wonders if this is the priority. Given all that is happening at the moment, is this the priority at this time? So is this part of the plan that the government has for getting our economy going? Somehow it is always people at that end of the socio-economic spectrum that are really the ones being watched most of the time, where even something as little as $700,000 that we might pay off extra in a year is something that this particular bill is being brought forward to try to resolve. But again, what that masks is that the government does not have a plan. This is part of its economic plan, and if this is what it is, and measures like this, then I think we're in pretty serious difficulty. The bill also makes the provision, or the correction rather, retrospective. The retrospective legislation always leaves a bad taste in one's mouth. And could it be avoided, etc. And still, perhaps, when we look at this in the Select Committee, we'll see if it is reasonable. Now, there is one good provision in the bill as well, Mr. Speaker, and this is that those appeals currently going through are saved. So if those appeals are successful, then that will be accepted. So those appeals are not frustrated, and I congratulate the Minister and the officials for thinking that through and making sure that at least retrospective legislation does take account of something that might have happened perversely. The regulatory impact statement also makes it clear that if the provision was not retrospective, there could be an additional $3.2 million of one-off payments, so coming out of those kinds of appeals. So that, I guess, that provision takes care of the risk. There is a second issue that the bill addresses, and that relates to the inconsistency between policy and legislation as set out in Section 61EA of the Social Security Act 1964. And this inconsistency has the unintended consequence of giving access to accommodation supplements to some full-time students when it is the intention that their conditions be regulated by student allowance regulations 1998 and the student loan scheme. So clearly the government, and there's another bill before Select Committee, using the same kinds of principles to make sure that student loans are taken care of by that particular scheme. So it is really about unintended consequences. Now, I'm pleased that the government is looking at unintended consequences. And I wonder, seeing as this relates to the ACC as well, what was the thoughts given to the unintended consequences of coming down so hard on ACC payments for the treatment of sexual abuse victims? Where was the unintended consequence of that type of policy that the government has brought forward? Because the effect of that on many women for many, many months was very, very serious. And I know my colleague Lynn Pillay received many cases that said, this has taken our lives backwards. So there's little inconsistency in what this government is doing. Because here there were clear unintended consequences of a particular policy they brought forward under ACC affecting abused women, sexually abused women, and yet here they are very careful to make sure that the unintended consequence is addressed. So this provision will exclude students who are eligible for assistance under the student loan scheme. Now, Mr. Speaker, we will support this to the House. I'm sure there are many other aspects of this bill that I haven't fully understood, so I look forward to robust discussion and debates in the Social Service Select Committee, of which I am a member, and I look forward to seeing exactly what some of the other unintended consequences are of this particular policy, and it will give us a broader opportunity to look at what are the government's plans in this particular area, and we'll come back to debate it here, other areas as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Tim McIndoe.
Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to